Alright, the next thing we're having a look at is the assessment criteria for this task. So we're still on the additional information PowerPoint and we're up to slide 14. So, as I've mentioned, this task will assess every single assessment criteria for the entire course. So you've had a go at addressing each criteria before you've gotten to this point. I'm not going to read through this, but you do need to actually look through it in detail. Basically, there are some things that we need to cover. So, the task needs to include reference to the following things: the context, the audience, the ideas, the perspective, and the evaluation. We also need to look at language features, stylistic features, convention as well. Please make sure that you've read through that information. There are some questions on each of those slides that you can have a look at, which might help you understand what you need to address in this task. We'll have a look at it in more detail when I'm back in class, but for now this should be able to give you a bit of an overview. Okay, so we're also doing a comparison. This is really important. There needs to be similarities and differences with the two texts that you're comparing. So what is a comparison? It's a higher order thinking skill. In the case of this task, you're expected to undertake the following steps in order to construct an independent comparative analysis of two texts. You cannot work with a partner, you cannot work in a group, it must be your own individual comparison. I suggest that you analyze your first text, then you go and analyze your second text, and then think about what is the same about these two texts. You should have considered some similarities before you chose your two texts, because you need to make sure that they have some similarities in there to start with. Then think about what's different about the two texts, and then consider the most significant aspects of what is the same and or what is different to include in your response. You can't include everything, so it's really important that you evaluate the most important points to include. You also have to ensure that you've selected content for analysis explicitly addressing the performance standard criteria. So it has to have language features in there, it has to have stylistic features, it has to talk about the ideas and the audience. A quick suggested framework for organizing your analysis. So you could potentially draw up a table and think about analyzing them in this way. If you want to use graphic organizers, I encourage you to do so, but you are in charge of your own comparison. You need to organize your own ideas. So this option is here on the slide if you'd like to use it. Lastly, a bit of a framework for your response. You have 2,000 words to use for this task, and you need to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding, comparative analysis, and application skills within it. Your response must be written. This may seem like a substantial word count, but once you've started to get all of your information together and you've actually started to critically analyze the two texts, you will find that you will run out of room to include everything. So you can't actually include all of the notes that you've used, which is similar to when we looked at Mice and Men and Toy Story. We had a lot of notes, but not all of them addressed what we needed them to do. Instead, think about prioritizing and selecting the topics you choose to ensure that you consider what is the same and what is different about the text. Remember that your comparison will be most effective if you treat the text with equal importance and attention to word count. So we don't want a piece of work that is 1,700 words looking at one text and then you're just cramming in a little bit more of the second text. It needs to be an effective comparison, which means you're comparing throughout. This brings me on to the last point. So you should construct your response in order to compare the text throughout, as opposed to analyzing the text separately and then considering them again at the end. This is what we spoke about with of Mice and Men and Toy Story comparison. We want to avoid that block method of comparison and actually look at the point-by-point method of comparison. So thinking about what your main points are and seeing how that's similar and different with each text. That's all for this PowerPoint. I really do encourage you to have a look through that assessment criteria in detail. Try to get your head around some of the language that's being used there, and again we'll have a look at it in a bit more detail when I'm back.